Good morning from Mirador. I'm Philip Meredith. As I like to do on a Wednesday, certainly, and sometimes on Mondays, I like to give Keith a break from opening the batting. It is actually quite demanding when it comes to it. It's just after 8 o'clock on Wednesday, the 10th of April. Mirador, as you know, is based in Lewis. The weather forecast for Lewis is sunny until about 11 a.m. Then it will cloud over, and then some light rain or drizzle will move in until much later this evening. The top temperature will be about 12 degrees. I hope that in 15 minutes or so, Susie will join us for our Wednesday chat before she has to go off to work. I've looked at the papers for this morning, and most of the papers' main story is a newly published review by a paediatrician called Hilary Cass into how the NHS are providing gender care for children and adults. The organisation that covers that type of treatment has been deemed inadequate, and in her review she makes various suggestions and findings that are really quite radical, in particular the use of puberty blockers. I'll come on to what the Daily Mail says shortly, because as ever it's very blunt and hard-hitting. Another subject that we will look at initially in the papers, but then after Susie has gone, I intend to update you, if I can, on the latest developments in the post office scandal. The inquiry into the post office scandal resumed yesterday, and a key figure, the heroic, frankly, brave victim himself, Alan Bates, gave evidence and came up with some memorable lines. For instance, he said that when he was dealing with the post office over this whole saga, he was dealing with thugs in suits, which I think is a very good way of summing up men in suits. The Guardian, thousands of children are unsure of their gender identity, and they're being let down by the NHS. As ever, The Guardian has another point of interest on its front page, which is the death of a 94-year-old gentleman called Peter Higgs, who is described as having been the giant of particle physics, the giant of particle physics. What The Guardian highlights about the gender issue is that the public debate over this very thorny issue is so toxic that commentators and officials are actually afraid to openly discuss their views. Now, on a personal level, I have two very good friends, both of whom have children who have transed. And I can comment on the bewilderment, the confusion, the upset it caused within the family, and all sorts of avenues are explored, counselling and so on. And at least in one case, my friend paid privately for, who was his daughter, and he's now trans, to be counselled and then treated. My other friend, two girls one of whom is now a trans male. Of course, this brings in, does it not, the J.K. Rowling issue and the Hate Crime Act in Scotland, because she just won't have this trans business at all. She will just simply say, sorry, you're a man, to a woman who's transitioned from male to female. Now, I mentioned the Daily Mail. Landmark report on gender case. At last, it says, a voice of sanity on children and trans dogma. The report, the review, pillars of gender treatment built on, quote, shaky foundations, unquote. Caution is needed before youngsters are allowed to change pronouns. This also brings in the gender neutral side of things. You know, the use of the word they, non-binary. So it's not an I or a we or a he or a she, it's they, meaning the person. Evidence is severely lacking over the use of puberty blockers. It seems that the NHS relied on one single report from Holland many years ago that suggested that puberty blockers were safe and reliable, but the review doubts that very much. And also that the treatment should take a much closer look neurologically by way of screening, as well as a mental health assessment as basics, because conditions such as autism, possibly even Asperger's, can contribute to this apparent wish to be somebody different. The Mirror features big time on Alan Bates and his description that the post office were nothing more than thugs in suits. The Financial Times highlight that as well, but also the big AI companies, OpenAI and Meta, are poised for artificial intelligence leap with bots that reason. Well, it's going some, isn't it? Also that the Rwanda State Airline turned down the use of itself for the Sunak asylum plan because it felt it would, quote, taint their brand, unquote. Just on the AI thing, in the eye, there's a woman who says this: I dated an AI boyfriend, then felt guilty for cheating on him. Well, I ask rhetorically, and we can cover this with John Prideaux a week today, I ask this rhetorically, what on earth is going on in people's minds? Yeah, the Times, again, the Cash Review, NHS Review, rejects the use of puberty blockers. It also features a report. Well, actually, I've heard of this before, but it claims to be a Japanese experiment wherein if you're angry or have other high emotions about something, you write them all down and then you chuck them in a bin. Apparently that's very beneficial. I leave you to decide whether that has any benefit whatsoever. The Sun concentrates on the royals, inevitably, no front page mention of the other more serious stuff. Blue Peter, so Peter Phillips, said to be the late Queen's favourite grandson. He and his girlfriend of 3 years have split up. And then in the Daily Express, bonkers ruling proves why the UK should quit the Euro Court. Conservative MPs for the UK, forgive me, Conservative MPs are now renewing calls for the UK to bow out of the European Convention on Human Rights, criticising what they describe as a bonkers ruling by the court. Yes, the Star, ever humorous. Picture of a young lad roasting in the sun with a donkey behind him on a deck chair. Thank God it's Friday, Fryday, because apparently it's forecast to be possibly 20 degrees centigrade in some places this weekend. So yes, the papers are predominantly concerned with the transgender issues, but just back to Alan Bates, the Telegraph said that his answers in evidence were short, precise and often funny. The Guardian called him a star witness who had the simple qualities that bullies fear the most. He's honest and stubborn. The Eye reports on the meeting between Lord Cameron, our Foreign Secretary, and Donald Trump. Apparently, despite them clashing over the years, it was deemed to be productive and warm. He views, does Cameron, Trump as the key, safe opener with the Republicans who are currently blocking a $60 billion aid package for Ukraine, which they need very, very much. So that's my review of the papers. I think we have my hero, Mr. Hayes, there. Oh, I've interrupted his breakfast.
You have.
Shall I remove you from the stage and come back later?
Anytime you want, but it's your program, so you set the agenda.
Yes, well, the next stage I'm hoping, I've sent her a link, is Susie. And then, as you know from yesterday, it's my intention to do some time, I can't do the whole morning, but to do some time looking more widely at the post office scandal and the many rather worrying revelations that have come out. It's not just, well, it is what the inquiry has found, but there are other third-party issues that have been revealed, ranging from the role of independent barristers through to the enormous amounts of money various executives accrued. But while these poor people were either imprisoned or tainted with a wrongful conviction and generally in debt and without a job. It really is a mind-boggling scenario. The other thing in the news today, Keith, was what has been described as the biggest benefit fraud to have been tried in a Crown Court. A group of Bulgarians, two of whom had to be extradited back from Bulgaria, are alleged, and they've all pleaded guilty. They are alleged to have accrued by fraud over £58 million on universal credit fraud over a period of 4 years. They are going to get whacked in terms of sentence, but it's not quite the point. That is a huge loss to any revenue, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
£58 million that could have been used for all sorts of better sources. I
have a fight getting £4.50 out of them. How the hell did they get that amount?
multiple applications, multiple false documents, references, bank statements, driving licenses, fake national insurance numbers. When I was at the bar in my earlier years in London, I did do quite a few of these things. It was very much the in thing. Although it wasn't Eastern Europeans in those days, it was generally Africans, in particular Nigerians, were very good at it. But I never did anything on that scale. Quite extraordinary.
Absolutely.
Quite extraordinary. So how are you today, Keith?
Yes, not too bad. I was not to bore people too much with the affairs of Parkinson's, but it seems to come and go. Last night, I could barely take a step without teetering. Today, I'm not too bad at all. And that is before I've had a pint.
You see, I know this indirectly because I have a very close friend just down the road who had a very serious stroke and then got Parkinson's. I'm not saying they're linked. So I know exactly what you're talking about, the variability of it all. I think you should talk about your Parkinson's. I think people should be made aware of how debilitating it is and how insecure people feel with it. Ironically, we are going for lunch at a different venue with my friend and his wife later today. And public transport is out of the question. He uses what he calls his dolly trolley. He's generally quite wobbly, at times very wobbly. Through no fault of his own, getting him in and out of the taxi and back home to where they live, there's no real parking. Classic Arundel, no real parking on the Ford Road. It brings it home. It's very tricky. Well, it was like you and I talking yesterday about the idea of you coming over to Arundel in the Red Devil. I just don't see it because it's just, it's worse than Lewis with narrow pavements, crowded, and so on. So, we plumped for Littlehampton, didn't we?
We did. Rather a pleasant place, actually, in a funny sort of way.
Yes,
it's not a typical seaside town at all, but it seems to have something for everybody.
Yes, it does.
Including, I may say, Philip, and perhaps we should save our pennies. It has one restaurant there that looks as if it's London standard, but also London prices.
Well, that is true. Actually, I was thinking about that because inevitably, if it did happen and we did hook up, which would be great, we would want somewhere to eat. I always use a large pub restaurant that's opposite the railway station called the Arran View.
Right.
It's very disabled friendly. And the dining tables have this wonderful conservatory type view of the river itself. And one of the chefs there is the son of a close friend of ours. And they always come up with the goods, in particular their fish and chips. They are genuine quality.
Right. Well, then we know where we're going to go.
Yes, well, that's what I would suggest. And of course, the other thing I mentioned was they have completely revamped the centre and the station forecourt. So it is very mobility scooter friendly, unlike Arundel, I'm afraid.
Right. No, Littlehampton suits me down to the ground.
Anyway, I'm going to let a certain Scorpio in.
Right, okay.
it's Susie Scorpio.
Good morning, both of you. Hi.
Yeah, thank you, Susie. We're both okay. Keith, his Parkinson's a bit hit and miss at the moment, but he seems not too bad this morning.
Good.
And we hope you're well.
I am very well, thank you very much.
And are you working today?
Yeah, I've got quite a busy day today. After talking to you, where I'm over to Lewis, and then I'm meeting with a new client in Lewis this morning as well. So, yeah, I've got quite a few visits on this morning and this afternoon.
Right, a busy lady.
Yeah, today and Friday.
A very hard worker too, I may say, Philip.
I'm in no doubt.
I do enjoy my glass of wine at the end of the day, I have to say.
Yes, what you call a glass, I call a bottle, but there we are.
I was being modest then.
Yes. Well, moderation is a dirty word for me, but unfortunately, one has to abide by it sometimes. Well, before you came on, and a very big welcome, obviously. The newspapers today they focus on two major things. One is that there's a publication of what's called the Cass Review, whereby a senior paediatrician called Dr. Hilary Cass has done a review of how the NHS cares for or does not care for transgender issues. And she's recommended some fairly fundamental changes, because the way the NHS has been dealing with that issue through a particular organisation, the name of which slips my mind, it's been deemed inadequate. It's not at the same level as other NHS areas of care. I wondered whether you have any particular views on that issue, or whether you know of anybody like I do whose children have decided to be somebody else. I wondered whether you have any views or thoughts on the matter, Susie.
It's certainly very sort of in the eyes of the public at the minute, the transgender community. I used to work at a school, and I know of one student there that has is now, I don't know what his now name is, but he's now a girl, not female, identifies as a she, and I didn't recognise it when I first saw her now. I just was like, oh my god, I didn't recognise him at all. And lovely students, and very, very happy with their transition. So it's really difficult. It's like having children of my own, and obviously being a child at once upon a time, I didn't have a clue what I was. When I was that age, I was just Susie. I was going to school. I didn't even know about people being gay. I had no knowledge of anything like that at school. So there was no awareness. So there was no discrimination. There was no, how do we talk to each other? So how can you know who you are at such a young age? I'm only finding out who I am now, and that's nearly 50 years.
Well, that's I can empathise with, and I'm considerably older than you. But on a serious level, this to me, this is the whole point. They are so vulnerable.
Yeah.
To particularly with the web, they are so vulnerable to be radicalized is used in a different context, but in a sense they are.
Yeah.
They are told that they have a right to change their sexual identity if they wish. They are told how to do it. I mean, there are the waiting list for this sort of thing in the NHS is over 4.5 years. That's the waiting list.
Gosh. It's also considered to be cool to be different. So it's again going back now to just sort of being, heterosexual. It's cool to have a label, whereas in the past we didn't want labels, and now those who didn't want a label want a label, though they don't want a label. So it's it's like a catch-22.
Well, it is. It's a vicious circle.
Yeah, you don't want a label, so you give yourself one, but then you don't want to be labelled.
It's almost as if they are unhappy with their original identity, and they want, as you say, another identity. But I wonder whether they're happy with that. I just don't know. I mean, the example you cited, it sounds to me like that particular student was happy with their transition.
But how can you really know? You can only see a shell. You don't know what's going on inside anybody. And
No.
you don't know who their influences are, you don't know their family background. So, for example, when I wanted to, I had a happy childhood in some respects, but my mum was divorced by the age of 3. So, and then she had more children. So my escapism was to go off into the fields and pretend to be a fairy or something, go around and look for fairies or play pirates with my brother, or go and make dens in the woods or play football in the park, to go and distract ourselves. I never thought about changing, who I was out on the outside. I could change how I feel inside.
Well, I say in a light-hearted way, you sound to me like the archetypal tomboy with your dens, your football, and
you say swing ball in the park.
Yeah. Well, you spoke only the other day, I think, to me about even now you just love getting lost in the woods.
Yeah, and that's what I did as a child, and it's just beautiful, and you're connected with nature, and it's enchanting. As a child, you think you're looking, look at a fairy, you believe they existed, but they do if you want them to. I can look at the hoverflies and play with hoverflies, and they could be my little fairies, because you can actually play with a hoverfly if you take the time to look at one.
Have you ever seen the play Midsummer Night's Dream?
Yeah, I studied it at school. It's one of my dreams still, to have a Midsummer Night's party with all fairy lights, and I just haven't done it yet. But you can get lost in your imagination, and I just don't know if the children of today have the same imagination we had in our youth, because we didn't have PlayStations. We had one TV, and your parents told you what you were going to watch. Well, you read books, Enid Blyton books. So you got lost in different worlds in different ways.
Well, the point you make there is my ad nauseam point is the lack of reading. I and my wife are firm believers in reading for that very reason, because, no doubt like you, I and Jackie, and no doubt Keith, his imagination was fed by the books we read.
Yeah.
Now, books are still available, but they're not read by the youngsters, as I understand it, anything like they once were, because the youngsters are too busy gaming or messing around on the internet.
Yeah.
And even putting the trans issue to one side, they are vulnerable to whatever is put on there. I can speak from experience, no names, no pack drill, but I know a young lad whose parents were not aware of him watching, what was he watching? Louis Theroux. Have you heard of Louis Theroux?
Oh, yes.
Who prides himself on going into very dangerous, dodgy situations all over the world, and tries to be eye to eye with radicals, criminals, you name it, racists. Well, it transpired that this lad had been watching these. and it had an effect on his mental health at far too young an age. You know, as parents, you feel stupid, and you feel guilty that you didn't do something about it, but it was all happening behind closed doors. And kids are curious, aren't they? They will embark on all sorts of things, often behind their parents' backs. But there we are.
My son plays. Oh, he plays Grand Theft Auto. Say that in the morning. And I would hear him screaming and shouting and swearing with his friends online. And I think he got so immersed in this world when he did show me a lot of disrespect. And I think he then believed that world exists in this world, and that's a reflection, which is obviously completely not. And he'd go off gambling, to go to casinos and gambling, or casinos.
It is nuts, and these games are so realistic, so compelling to that generation that, yes, it doesn't surprise me that they think that, well, they wouldn't call it this, but that is their escapism, and they are escaping to, all right, a parallel universe, but it's real, it exists. No, Grand Theft Auto is I'm sorry to use a positive word, but it is an iconic. Game of Thrones is the other. Game of Thrones is just extraordinary.
Bring back Pac-Man.
I remember Pac-Man.
Yeah.
I remember Pac-Man. I remember tennis, TV tennis.
Oh yeah, the little blip.
Moving
bigger
moving the things up and down to bounce the ball back. I mean, how primitive were they? At university, I remember Space Invaders.
Yep.
Where, if you remember, you zapped various horrible aliens and whatever as quickly as you could before you were destroyed yourself.
Yeah.
But they are prehistoric compared to what
definitely
we have today. I mean, the games that my daughter doesn't play them at all. She's in the film industry. She doesn't need to do games, but my sons do it. I mean, my youngest was down this last week. All right, he doesn't do it that often, but when he does it, boy, is he immersed in it?
Yeah.
As indeed is his girlfriend, who was staying with us. And when the two brothers get together, blimey, it's like witnessing some sort of fight.
Yeah. I had the neighbours knock on my door once because they thought my son was having a fight with me and attacking me. He was so immersed in GTA. And I said no, because the street could hear him shouting and screaming and yelling at them. And I was like, who's on PlayStation?
Yeah.
You're opening my eyes a little bit because I haven't experienced any of these things. It is talking about being a journalist who has looked a terrorist in the eye. Yes, I have in several countries, actually. I had no idea that I would have had the effect that this program had on this young man. But I barely have seen a computer game, and the bits that I have seen haven't turned me on at all. I mean, I'm a good stiff upper lip Englishman who sups a pint and smokes a pipe and sort of here and well done, chaps. And if I'm the sort of man that's doing the legislating, then God help them, because I just don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, some of them I can't claim to have watched many. But I've picked up on some stuff. I do stress the quality of the imagery and also the soundtracks. You know, there is a whole genre with the Oscars and things like that, where gaming soundtracks are being given Oscars and BAFTAs. It's got to that level. But invariably they are violent, they are hair-raising, they are ultra competitive.
They also sorry, Philip. They also show disrespect to women. I mean, I did go on GTA because I want to know what my son's playing, and women are treated like prostitutes. So it's also, you know, or you can even design yourself a woman, create your own. Yeah, and the women's, you know, like draped over cars, but it's so it's treating disrespect to women and violence, aggression.
I'm not. I mean, you know, we're back to another very, very sore subject. I mean, you call it disrespect, but basically, you know, misogyny and sexism. It doesn't surprise me, sadly, that rears its head in these things. And again, that's another very insidious trait that the kids are going to be picking up subliminally. You know, your own son is disrespectful behavior, shouting and ranting at you, fueled by a video game. But
you see, what worries me about what you're talking about is, I mean, first of all, that I've gone through life completely unaware of this sort of thing. But we talk about disrespect for women. First of all, women scare the bejesus out of me. But you know, I can remember taking my daughter, who was born and raised partially in Canada, to Italy, and her coming back and saying to her mother, "Mom, an Italian boy has just pinched my bum," and the two of them laughed and thought she was coming of age. You know, we never had any problems with that sort of thing. And to me, it's just sailed by. All this subliminal, my God, you know, he did this and that, this is disrespect to women and so on and so forth. And I mean, my wife would say, for instance, you know, the latest thing is, let's stop builders on a building site whistling at pretty ladies that go by. And my wife said, Jesus, if they stop whistling at me, I'm going to worry.
Yeah, well, you see, your reaction is very much of your generation.
Yes, indeed. But I'm not going to apologise for my generation. I think it's rather still.
I'm not asking you to apologise. But I personally take the view that Italians shouldn't go around pinching the bums of complete female strangers. But it's what they do.
Yes, exactly.
You know,
I've had worse happen to me.
That's the tension. It's what they do, and it's incredibly difficult to stop. And you will. Well, you stop by educating people. That's how you stop it, and it is a very long and tenuous process because we're talking about generational, institutionalized behavior and attitudes. You know, the builder's wolf whistling. My God, I mean, I did student jobs in the building trade and it was non-stop. You know, scaffolders. I must confess, I haven't heard it a lot lately. I mean, there is quite a lot of work always going on where I live, but I haven't heard much of it lately. But
a couple of years ago, sorry, Philip. A couple of years ago in Uckfield, we had building works going down on the main road, and a few of the construction workers there were sort of catcalling, and they got removed, and a new team was sent in.
I missed that last bit. They got what?
That the team were removed because the public complained that they were, you know, making comments and wolf whistling. So the team were removed, and a new team was sent in to take over.
Oh right, well that's encouraging. I mean, because when when it happens,
I'm terribly sorry, but I'm sitting on the sidelines, and it is my generation. You're quite right, Philip, but I find this quite amusing because, to be quite honest with you, I don't actually whistle at ladies in the street. I don't pinch their bums, but inside I can look at a lady and think, oh, what a nice bottom, or what a good-looking chick. So if I'm thinking it and don't actually manifest it, what's the difference?
There is a difference. There is a difference because
Right.
if you allow your entirely justifiable thoughts as a man or as a woman to a man, that you fancy them, you find them attractive, that's one thing. If you then translate that into a tactile, physical touching, unwanted tactile touching, you've gone too far.
Yes, I'll go along with you that far, but I mean, sort of banning builders on a site that you know are going to be looking at a lady when they walk by and admire them. Actually, in my view, admire them and whistle I don't find that too offensive personally.
Look,
as a woman, I have experienced a huge amount. When I look back over my life, I have been treated like a piece of meat for as long as I can remember. I've been, at work. I used to have, I had a lady at work. Like, I used to go to do the post, the franking machine. She was a lesbian, and every time I went to do the post, she'd come into this very small room and walk past me by putting her hands on my hips. So I used to be terrified of going to do the mail. One of the senior managers at the Christmas party, I think he was actually one of the directors, whose wife was about to give birth, suggested that we went to the toilet together. And I hadn't really spoken to him until that point. So, and I ran a mile. But I've experienced it many, many times over. I've been groped, I've been on holiday at 15, and I walked past a guy who just put his arm out at chest height and obviously stroked across. And I was horrified. I was so upset and distraught by it that, I still remember it now. And I could count how many times I have experienced unwanted attention. And even now I get it. And I get it through the media. I get it through Facebook or Instagram. I'm approached or direct messaged by people saying, asking for friend requests, but I don't want them to be friends. And I think I met somebody in Morocco who was 21, and we swapped Instagram out there. But now he keeps messaging me, and then if I don't message back, he'll send a question mark. And I said the other day, look, I don't mind talking to you, but I have no intentions other than if you want to talk about culture. I said, but never send me a question mark. I said, I find it insulting. If I don't respond, it's because I'm busy, because I don't want to respond. And I hate blocking people. It's something I don't like. That is, I want to say, actually, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to any man in particular, really, apart from the ones that I know personally.
No, I understand. I understand this business of. I mean, when you're on television, a lot, as I have been, is you get all sorts of ladies sending you messages and saying, "I like something to you," and you look at them and they are under 20, it's easy for me. All I got to do is send back, "I'm 80," and they leave you alone.
And just going back to what you were saying about the building site, Keith, there's a fine line between banter. And, I do miss having that banter. We used to just have a laugh, and that has been taken away because you can't define the line between banter and insulting someone anymore. So no one says anything because of the fear of speaking. I said, I met a client yesterday, and I was talking about disabled or disability. I hate the word disabled. I said that to her. She's a polio survivor. She said, well, I am disabled. She says, I don't mind at all being called disabled. And I said, I hate using that word because, if you say disabled, look at the Paralympics are coming up soon, and look how enabled they are with their disability. So for me, I couldn't even do any Olympics, never mind the Paralympics. Yeah. So I hate that word disabled. I just call it disenabled, really. There's certain things you can't do. but I hate. Sometimes I don't even know what word to say because of fear of causing offence.
Yeah.
But then there is, the banter and you get the giggle.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps I am unusual because I'm disabled, really, as you well know. But I don't care. I tell people that I can't do this and I can't do that. And if they don't want to accept me, tough. That's their problem, because I think I've still got quite a lot to offer. So, if it's a question of hiding the fact that that I can barely walk, that I can barely stand, I can bloody well talk.
Certainly can. You certainly can.
But Philip's point, I think, is well taken, because it's my belief is that, for instance, the bloke in the corner building site who whistles, is you can't legislate him out of that. What you can do is you can try and persuade him not to. And I do accept that there is a balance between those people that find something is very offensive and other people will find those people totally acceptable. So to look after those that are offended, I think is a matter of persuasion and respect. Now, having said that, I said to you, women scare the hell out of me, and they do in many ways.
Because you?
Well, not anymore, but you did when you first came in. I mean,
really?
Yeah. I mean, but that's true of me with anybody, not just a lady. I'm basically quite shy, and it takes me a little while to warm up with people. Once I get going, there's no stopping me. But when you meet ladies for the first time, I'm always very, very cautious. Don't ask me why. It's just in me, but it doesn't affect my way of treating them. And in fact, my late wife and I, we would go to cocktail parties, and she'd say, "You take the women, and I'll take the men." And she would go and she would chat to the men, and we always argued that in chatting to the men, she stopped them talking about how much beer they'd drunk and how many women they'd flirted with and so on and so forth, and would talk about serious things. And I found the same thing with the women. You stopped them talking about babies and knitting and so on and so forth, and got them actually talking about sensible things. And we used to do that all the time.
I think that I must deep down, maybe I have to go back to the trans thing. I can't bear small talk. So I can't bear talking about knitting. When we had babies, it was always our labour story. I'm like, I can't bear talking about it anymore. I need a genuine, deep, meaningful conversation about something relevant. When people start to talk to me just about, I don't know, rubbish, and I just go, I can't do this. Like it's like it's not on my level at all. So maybe I should join the men's team. Talk about my beer.
Good for you. Yeah, I mean, and actually, I think in many ways it's my belief in the equality of the sexes. Is a woman joins a men's conversation and she holds her own. I'm full of admiration, and not only that, I want to talk to her. I don't want to talk to them anymore.
I was with somebody the other day with another. I was with I won't make names, but I was going in as a potential carer with another girl, and I can't mention it actually. No, well, we'll scrap that one. It was more like a conversation where you join the conversation and then you are totally ignored. So you try and say something, and then the other just go, "All right, I won't even bother wasting my energy." So it's that whole, but like, am I actually here in the room? Did I actually speak then?
I don't want to take away from the conversation that you started, Philip, and we'll go back to it immediately. But the thing that upsets me is, for instance, I was in the conversation with a group of men, most of whom you would have said were, intelligent. They were from the professions and so on and so forth. And we were talking about discrimination and so on, and the makeup of the House of Commons. And I said, I'm a meritocrat. And the bloke next to me turned to me and said, a meritocrat. That upsets me in a conversation. If somebody can't actually defend their corner, but can only sneer, then I'd prefer not to be in that company. Sorry to take that red herring. I'm famous for it. Back to you, Philip.
No, it's not a red herring. I just don't know what the word means.
But red herring?
No, that's two words. Did you say Americrat?
Yes. I believe that people should hold office or even a job because they are capable of doing it.
You mean you're a meritocrat?
Yes. What do you think I said?
thought you said American. Oh, I see now. So
I
thought you were trying to tell the viewer that you're very fond of Americans, which
no, a meritocrat.
Yes, well, that's quite right.
6 hours in the morning, I list.
That's quite right. But as Alan Bates found, he found that the people in suits in the post office and Whitehall were just thugs who didn't give a monkeys about the common man. Going back to Susie's anecdote about the rude scaffolders or whatever in, I think it was Uckfield, and enough people complained so that a different team were moved in, and no doubt were told why.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking that it then stopped?
Yes.
Well, there you are, Keith. You see, that's the way you educate. Sometimes you have to use the stick. I have witnessed over the years, and it's when there are groups of these builders or scaffolders, and they all want to be cocks of the north. They're all showing off, and there's this sort of horrible energy about their. It's not just wolf whistling; it's when the heckling starts, and it gets very, very profane, really, and explicit, and that's very, very intimidating. It's bad enough for a bloke to listen to it, because a bloke.
Where I live, we had I've had about 2 or 3 years of building construction going on down the back of the garden behind the Bird and Eye Hospital, and some days all I could hear was the C word and the shouting and the like you say, the profanities and the general just dross of what they were saying. And I had to sit and listen to this in my garden for nearly 3 years. And in the end, it just ruined every summer. I'd sit outside, oh, here we go again. And look, particularly when they were close, but even far away, it's all you can hear. And
they are as a culture, they are gobby.
Yeah, and it's all about
gobby. I mean, yes. we had some builders round our neighbour's place a few weeks ago. Now, I can't complain about profanity, but there were a lot of them, and it's as if they keep themselves going by being gobby.
Yeah.
And they have no concept of how sound carries, because sound does carry.
And the conversations that I've heard, I think if their girlfriends or wives knew how they spoke about them, it was just disgusting, really. Telling their friends.
Well, I know we shouldn't judge books by covers, but that type of bloke, and having, as I say, albeit years ago, worked in the building trade as a student, it's no excuse, but it is literally part of the culture.
Definitely, it's inherent.
With the odd exception, it's all macho, very chauvinistic. And they say the most dreadful things about those they're meant to love.
Yeah.
It's very sad.
In the name of banter.
Yeah, that's an interesting subject. Banter. I mean, when was it? Was it Monday, Keith, or last week? We were talking with Harry about the meaning of words. You know, he disputed the use of the word hate, didn't he?
Yeah.
You know, hate is such an extreme word.
Mm.
And we looked it up, and the OED definition is intense dislike. Well, he opined, and I don't disagree with him, that it's more than that. Hatred is a very, very strong emotion.
Mm.
And I raised the legal concept of an offence called threat to kill.
Yeah.
And in law, to commit threat to kill, you have to mean what you say and fully intend your victim to believe you mean it. So an example would be this poor lady up in Bradford
I was going
who
to.
was stabbed to death by an ex-partner with her baby in the pram, maybe their child, I don't know. And it transpires that he was already on bail for charges of assaulting her and threatening to kill her. So that was an example of the prosecution believing they could prove that he intended to carry out what he was doing, threatening, and he intended her to believe it. And she reported it. And yet again, he's on bail, he's not banged up, he's clearly a danger, and he carries out his threat. So that's an example of him meaning to kill. But how many times have we said ourselves or heard people say, God, I could kill you for that, without ever meaning it. So, you know, the word banter is used by people who offend as a neutral word to cover up what is not banter, in my view. And men in particular are very, very good at it. Yeah, oh, it's just banter. Like, right, another example.
Yeah. Or I was just joking.
Yeah, the Yorkshire Cricket Club racism scandal. Now, it may not have been your cup of tea, but basically, Yorkshire County Cricket Club were almost banned from being a cricket club because of institutionalized racism against Asian players. And there was a big inquiry about it. And those who were accused of making disparaging, arguably racist remarks, like, we've got far many of you in our team, we've got to do something about that. Now, just reflect on that, because that was one of the things that was said by a white ex-English cricket captain, actually. Now, as an Asian person, they took that very seriously. Everybody else said it was just banter. What do you guys think?
Well, can I give you an example of where I think it's a fine line, Philip? When I was working in Canada, a friend of mine was a chap called Bill Munsey, who eventually became a star in the American Football League, but he started his career in the Canadian Football League. So he was a big man. And he got a job along with his football playing career with the local Parks Board, using his athletic prowess and so on. I had another friend who was somewhat older who had served in the Air Force during the war and then had emigrated to Canada. And the two got to know one another. And one day, the Air Force guy came in to the Parks Board office where I happened to be and saw Bill and said, "Hi, Bill, how are you?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, fine, how are you?" And the Air Force guy said, "Oh, working like a black." And then he suddenly realized what he'd said, and the two of them, their eyes met. What's going to happen? And Bill burst out laughing. Diffused the whole situation because he knew the chap had no evil intent.
Yes, it's still
Now bear in mind, we're talking about the 1960s. We're not talking about yesterday. But
yes, I mean, that is not a phrase that is remotely acceptable, in my view, these days.
No, it's not. But what I'm saying is that in those days, when there was that where the idea of discrimination between colour was far higher and more tense than it is now, they could have turned it into a nasty incident, the two of them. They didn't.
Yeah. Well, it's credit to him. Credit to him to have turned the other cheek.
Yeah.
I have two examples. I'm a secret. Well, I'm not so secret. I love Married at First Sight, particularly the Australian version because it's very fiery. And I'm watching the show at the moment, and there's some characters in there that are incredibly fit and muscly and young and beautiful. And then there's three couples that are sort of more in their 40s and their 50s. And obviously their lifestyles change, their body shapes are different, and they're amazing people. And one of them is a fitness personal trainer. And they were at the pool, and there's a few that have body issues that didn't want to get undressed. And he went down to the pool and said, "Oh, look, the whales are out," which caused a lot of offence. And he said, "Oh, he was only joking." And then on another occasion, he was talking with the mates at the gym, saying, "Oh, if there comes a couple swap, feel free to have sex with his wife." And that got back, and obviously that was totally inappropriate. But he just brushed it off as, "Oh, you're only joking. That's our banter."
Nah, it's sorry.
No, exactly.
That is a prime example of what I've been trying to.
Yeah. Oh, he also said at one of the dinner parties to one of the other husbands to put a muzzle on his wife because he didn't like what she was saying, and tried to pass that off as So
this is a reality show. This is real.
Yeah,
life.
yeah.
Good God.
I know, and he's in his 20s. This Australian guy. So obviously he was hauled over the coals. But this is the culture, behind us. Don't stick a muzzle on your wife.
Well, it's done nothing to reassure me that the basic Australian male has changed.
Yes.
Clearly not.
No, and the older ones, they're just beautiful. There's one lady she's got such a beautiful soul, and to feel that there's a segregation between age and, you're figure conscious because they're all running around doing, weights and chin ups and all those sorts of things, and then there is just the normal person who's, we go through the menopause, we get a little bit of a tongue on ourselves. Can't possibly, unless I'm in the gym 24/7, look like a 21-year-old fitness instructor.
Yeah, I think this whole issue has several ramifications. I was in Canada as quite a young man. I graduated in 1963. In fact, I didn't graduate until 1964, but I started my broadcasting career in 1963. And I wasn't allowed on the air to begin with because I sounded English, right? That's the reason that I wasn't allowed on the air. I sounded English. And now there's nobody less discriminatory than me, but it pissed me off. But I didn't go and complain and wave my arms. I just worked 10 times harder until in the end they couldn't ignore the fact that the best bloke that they got in the newsroom was me. So I do tend to take a different view of things because of my own experience. But I also don't try to impose those views on other people. People must get on with dealing with things the way they deal with them. But there are sort of, to me, it was a benefit that I was discriminated against. Because I was a lazy bugger. I wouldn't have worked anywhere near as hard if I didn't have to overcome very serious obstacles to get where I wanted to go.
There are so many different forms of discrimination. I mean, I had to shrug off lots of stuff being in London looking to get a place in a London set of chambers. I was I was locked into a set of chambers overnight once because they literally forgot about me in the waiting room. That's true. In Gray's Inn. There was another chap, a head of chambers, also in Gray's Inn, funnily enough, who interviewed me, and he basically he went on for about 10 minutes, and he said, you know, why are you down south? Why don't you just go back up north? And I said, because I've got no legal connections up north. Everything I've done is down here. And he said, well, you better think about going up north, because with that accent, you won't make it down here. And then my best one was I was rejected by a set of chambers in the Temple, and this is true. And I wasn't given a reason because they're pretty brutal. And I met somebody from that chambers who had supported my application a little while later. I'd been interviewed by their head of chambers, rather pompous, very old school chap. And I happened to ask him, this other bloke who liked me, why was I rejected? And I kid you not, because our head of chambers doesn't like gingers.
Oh.
Because in those days I had very, very red hair.
Oh.
So yeah, and in a sense you shrug it off. I would never have used in those days the word discrimination. It just didn't sort of exist in my vocabulary. But thinking back, thinking in more modern ways, you know, and they were playing with my future.
Yeah, because of your hair colour.
With my future, because of my accent, from my origins, and my hair colour, which is simply extraordinary. But there we are.
Well, I say I'm a northerner. My mum wouldn't let me have a northern accent. She said you'll never get a job if you speak Yorkshire.
Well, funny you should. Well, there you go.
And now everybody has. The more quirky the accents, you know, the better prospects you have, really.
Well, that is certainly the way with the media. I don't know whether Keith agrees, but on the channel he hates, the BBC, all you get now are regional accents.
Yeah.
Yes, but you know, as I was talking to a colleague about this, and he said, I don't object to the regional accent. What I object to is A, poor English, and B, poor broadcasting technique.
Well, precisely.
Yeah.
And that's back to know it.
I think I told you that a very famous broadcaster in the Midlands, Tony Butler, hadn't uttered a word on television when he came to me for a job at BRMB, the first commercial radio station there. And Tony was from the Black Country, like. I mean, I can't really do it, but he was broad. And in the interview, I said, well, have you ever been on radio or television? And he said, meand. I said, what do you mean, meand? He said, well, I do the score to the BBC on a Saturday afternoon, he said, and I creep up under the camera and I put the score in front of the person reading it. He said, and I didn't actually put my hand back in time one day, and I got my hand on. I thought, this guy is a natural. I hired him.
Wonderful.
The comedian that whose name I've just forgotten at the moment, who spoke like that, got hold of him, made him famous. I gave him a phone-in show, and he would come on and say, Aston Villa, bloody frilly knickers, can't score a goal. The fans thought it was a different outside the box, but he was a great broadcaster. And
was the comedian Lenny Henry?
No, it wasn't. He was a white guy, but very, very famous for speaking just like that.
Yeah. There are some accents that you do need subtitles for, I'm afraid.
Oh, yes. I mean, the one about the nude singers. What was it called? The chaps that became strippers.
Oh, Full Monty.
The Full
Yes,
Monty.
the Full Monty apparently had to have subtitles in the States.
Oh, I'm not surprised with the States.
I love it. If you've watched Jeremy Clarkson's Farm, what's his name? The father of the farm hand. He's brilliant. No one understands what he's saying, and Jeremy will listen to him and then he'll walk away going, "Not got a clue."
Yeah, I mean, it took me a while to get used to the northeastern, not just Geordie, but Wearside as well. When I was up there as a student, some of it was very, very non-understandable. It really was subtitle stuff. Some of the Scottish accents are the same.
Yeah, my partner's from Dundee, so he tells me a lot of the language that they speak, and he knows different accents from different regions in Scotland. He's spot on each time, and the things that he tells me and why this phrase is particular was brilliant, and it's so funny. They're fantastic. I can't remember one. I've always share one, but it just has me in stitches the whole time.
Well, that's good. Yeah, Dundee. That's the south of Fife, isn't it?
It's on the east coast, sort of.
It is. Yeah. It's down.
All I know is it's incredibly cold and windy.
Well, I'm afraid that goes to most of the north.
Yeah, on the east side. At least on the west side, you're getting the Atlantic, rather than the North Sea.
Yeah, well, as we know, the west coast of Scotland gets the Gulf Stream most of the year. So you get palm trees growing up there. But no, coming from Greater Manchester as I do, I mean, I'm surprised I didn't have webbed feet. It just rains pretty much constantly in Manchester, whereas Yorkshire, the other side of the Pennines, is much, much drier. Bizarre. But there's a reason for everything, particularly with the weather. There must be a reason why one is on one side of the Pennines and is drier, the other is the other side of the Pennines and is considerably wetter.
I'm dry and you're wet.
Sorry to interrupt. Jasper Carrot was the.
Jasper Carrot, yes. Yeah. Fantastic. Now I'm going to have to interrupt because I've done a bit of a Keith and I haven't didn't put the on button on my charger on my phone. I'm on 2%. So if I go black, it's because I've disappeared.
Well,
or am I allowed to say that? I'm going to get into trouble.
I can either bid you farewell and vanish you now, or you shouldn't really let a phone go black.
On the screen, I might disappear.
Yes, that which means your phone is completely out of power.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I can carry on until that point. But I've got work.
Jasper Carrot famously is or was a Birmingham City fan. He was a Blue Nose. And it was he who coined the phrase about Birmingham City. You draw some, you lose some. No mention of a win. You know, the normal phrase is you win some, you lose some.
You do.
Not with Birmingham. You draw some, you lose some. Very, very funny man. Very funny man. I remember.
Can I tell you another little vignette about him, which is a bit obscure, but he invested in Complete Studios, which was a post-production outfit in London, right in the heart of London, and it was owned by a guy called Paul Smith, whom I knew quite well. In fact, I used Complete Studios myself a couple of times. And one day I went in and asked for Paul, and they said he's across the road preparing a new program. And I went over, and he was sitting with a plank and a tea chest, and they were busy working away. What program would they were they working on?
And Teach Roadshow.
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Ah,
Paul Smith
Fantastic.
is now listed as something like the sixth wealthiest man in the broadcast industry.
yes, I'm sure.
All on money from Jasper Carrot.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Right. Well, we've been going, Susie, for an hour. Do you not have to go to work at 9:15, or is it not that time today?
No, I've got to be with a client at 9:30, so I shall be heading off shortly.
All right. Well, I'm going to take up another half hour with Keith on the post office scandal. Thank you for being on. I shall let you go, if I may, and then you'll see Keith on Monday.
Yes.
Keith.
I wanted to say one little thing going back to AI just before I go. I scanned the papers and I saw a little article of this woman said, I had an AI boyfriend and I felt guilty when I cheated on him.
Yes, I mentioned that. I mentioned that before you came on. It's in the eye.
That's AI going too far.
Tell me about it.
Right, I'll love you and leave you, and have a good day. And I'm heading over to Lewis in about an hour and a half.
You too. Just before you go, Keith, on Monday, are you inviting Susie on, or am I?
I'm. We've got to sort things out, of course, for sure. But I thought that you wanted to do Mondays and Wednesdays.
Yes. Well, I would like to.
Yes, that's fine by me.
I mean,
what I'm really looking for is not to bother viewers with it, but I'm working sort of 7 days a week and 12 hours a day on most days. And you, God bless you, are beginning to alleviate that so that I can draw a breath. So yes, please.
Well, that's the idea. Okay. Well, Susie, bless you. Thank you very much. See you Monday.
Thank you. See you on Monday. Have a lovely weekend.
You
and
too.
We're not quite there, but we get it.
Okay, Keith.
Okay.
Well, in the days of the two Bs, sadly no longer, Richard and I raised this nightmarish scenario about this nearly 1,000 sub postmasters and postmistresses prosecuted for thefts of varying sums of money, some really quite large, from their sub post offices. And many were convicted, most were prosecuted by the post office themselves, but some were prosecuted by the CPS. And Richard and I, you may remember, raised various issues about how could it be that nobody cottoned on to the fact that there were so many all over the country, and the incredulity that they could all be dipping their fingers in the till, which brought on questions about lack of disclosure, lack of transparency, and so on. Well, now we know, the public knows, that it was a massive scandal. It was a massive scandal to the extent that there's been a public inquiry into it that began in 2021 and resumed again yesterday with evidence from the big whistleblower, a victim himself, a man called Alan Bates. And one of the papers today described him giving evidence. He was short, to the point, precise, often funny. Another newspaper said he is the worst enemy of the thugs in suits. He is honest and stubborn. And that's how it has panned out, because he led the group of the victims who in the end successfully sued the post office, but all of their compensation, more or less, was taken up inevitably by legal fees. The ramifications, the effects on these people has been enormous. Men and women were imprisoned. One woman was in prison whilst pregnant. Most of them lost their livelihoods. I watched a program yesterday whereby an ex-lady postmistress, for the first time, went back to the village and what was her post office, and she found it mentally torment.
Imagine.
She's still in debt. Her family don't speak to her because they still think she's guilty, which I find extraordinary.
Yeah.
She's totally isolated and mentally and physically affected because they're in enormous debt. She dreads the thought of ever bumping into one of her old customers, even though she is innocent, because it's the stigma. And there always will be people who will not accept the truth, rather like following Donald Trump, for example.
Yeah.
You know, these sort of blinkered MAGA idiots. And every country has them.
Yeah.
Well, it's also been revealed that during the time that all these prosecutions were going on, the executives at Royal Mail and the Post Office, including Adam Crozier, who, if I'm right, you'll tell me, was once, I think, a sports minister.
Yes, I believe he was.
Definitely involved in politics, were raking in enormous amounts of money. We're talking millions. Mercifully, the current CEO of the Post Office, a chap called Nick Reed, who also has given evidence to the inquiry, has put a stop to all of this. And he's given, you know, it's a really good shake-up. And his own salary is, by general standards, really quite modest. So there is at last a level of change. But the one thing that, as an ex-barrister, troubled me hugely was the revelation that a barrister from London, who I won't name because it can be found out on the internet if you want, but a senior prosecuting barrister, independent from anybody else, so a member of a leading London set of chambers. And I'm not going to name him or the chambers because I know him. I have worked with him. I've always rather liked him. I've never had a problem with him at all. And it came as a real shock to me when he appeared at the inquiry, because he had been responsible for persuading a technology expert to change his opinion about the Horizon software made by Fujitsu that had been known, even during the prosecutions, to have been dodgy and faulty and give false readings, and ultimately could even from Japan itself be meddled with remotely. So the expert gave his initial opinion, which really was that this could all be down to this IT glitch. Well, the barrister didn't like this. Obviously, the post office solicitors didn't like it, but the barrister didn't like it either. And instead of accepting the opinion and giving the post office robust advice not to proceed in this particular case, he did nothing of the kind, and he wrote an advice himself, which still exists in black and white, advising the expert to change his evidence. In other words, almost putting words in his mouth to strengthen their case, because otherwise their case may fail. Well, that flies in the face of every standard that the independent bar is meant to stand for.
Yeah.
And at the end of the inquiry, I wouldn't be surprised if the regulatory body, the Bar Standards Board, does something about this with this particular barrister.
Yeah.
Because it's not the way it should be done. It's a very, very bad look. Because this lady was convicted, disclosure was very limited, and she was imprisoned. And she spent 4 months in prison for something she'd never done. And at the inquiry, this barrister gave evidence, and he preambled everything he was going to say by how deeply sorry he was that he had contributed to a miscarriage of justice and her suffering. And interestingly, her reaction was, well, I accept his apology. I still think he was putting words in the expert's mouth, which he undoubtedly was, to suit the case. But actually, the main reason I'm accepting his apology is because he is the first and only person to have apologized to me about this. Imagine that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All those people in Whitehall, the post office, originally Royal Mail,
yeah,
the thugs in suits, nobody had ever apologized to her.
Well, Philip, this raises several things in my mind. First of all, I wish I was Dean Swift, because I would love to write a Gulliver's Travels about our modern society. It is actually our society is getting pretty rotten to the core, and I'm not sure whether it was Plato or Socrates who said, but since one was the pupil of the other, is when a man becomes an expert in one thing, he immediately becomes an expert in everything else.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what's happening in our society, and particularly when it comes to computers. I have been waging, I call my campaign the Day of the Triffids. I've been waging a campaign about computers for a long time. All you've got to do is to deal with your local bank to see the flaws. And the flaws are enormous. Does anybody do about it? Anything about it? Oh, yeah. They close the branches and move them on to using the computers more than you are the people across the counter. And my understanding is that, in fact, at long last, somebody has been actually taken to court on the Horizon issue. But we are a society that will not look at itself in any sort of realistic way. Is everybody, barristers, if I may say so, but broadcasters, journalists, teachers, we are all absolutely sure that we're right. And yet we have these flawed computers which we deal with, whether it's on a day-to-day basis to solve the crossword puzzle, or whether it's to do with the bank and our personal accounts. But God help us when we get it wrong with the computers in an aeroplane, because that really is going to bring home the thing to roost. And yet there is no discriminatory looking at the computer industry. None whatsoever. There, I've had my rant.
I'm shocked to hear that. I didn't know that. You're saying there's no regulation?
Not that I can find. There are specific regulations. For instance, the question of that you must keep computer information secret.
Well, that's data protection. That's
it. Well, the Data Protection Act is. Did you know that there is a clause in there that allows your local council to look into your bank account if they suspect you're withholding council tax?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Keith.
Well, you see, there are those sort of things flying around, which to me are computer related. That's just one of the more obvious ones. Nobody's done anything about it, by the way, and it was used widely during lockdown. But I mean, I've twice been denied compensation for money taken out of my account because the bank refuses to accept that its computer can do any wrong. And in fact, one woman said, I've got to be very careful with the bank's money. Sorry, it's my money. It disappeared out of my account. She couldn't get her mind around the fact that the computer had allowed this money to be taken out, which was mine. No, it was the bank's money. She'd got to protect that. There are lots of little irritations that suggest to me that whereas we use the computer ourselves as we do for this broadcast, and there are lots of good things about computers, is that there is no overall body that will accept suggestions and look to see whether the computer is actually misappropriating stuff or misinforming the way that it did in the post office case.
Well, it did. It did precisely that.
Exactly.
I mean, I have a close to home example, no names, of a bank getting it very wrong with the computers. When my mother-in-law passed away, part of her money was with a certain bank in Chichester. And so my wife and her brother went for a meeting with the bank about the way the probate and the estate was being handled. Now, Jonathan, unbeknown to the bank, is a very, very clever man. He is techno savvy, and in his day, he has actually designed software, not just for banks, but for heart monitors, for hospitals. You know, we are talking a very, very clever man. But the bank were unaware of this, and they were very obstructive to him and my wife, and started spouting all sorts of technical stuff, and it could be down to this, and we can't do that. And in the end, my brother-in-law said to me, he said, look, I am starting to get a bit angry here because I have designed the software you are using, and you are pontificating to me as if I'm some idiot. I know exactly how your systems work. Now, will you please start to show some respect? And the atmosphere changed just like that.
Yeah.
And that's a true story.
Yes, okay. Well, believe it. I don't know why. I mean, perhaps it's always been part of human nature, the reluctance to accept that anything that we've actually created could possibly be flawed.
That's right.
And yet there are more flaws than there are actually successful practical applications. Not just the computers, a whole host of things.
That's right. And as you rightly point out, it's the glitches, it's the flaws that are the mischief, the danger. And you've hit on the two very different levels of computer value and usage. There's a world of difference between you and I using our laptops, even to do Mirador.
Yeah.
And the computers on a plane that claim to fly it across the Atlantic. The computers worldwide with the rogue states, the cyber attacks from Iran, Russia, China, you name it. The fact that a British minister flying back from Poland flies over Kaliningrad, which, as I understand it, is a Baltic Russian enclave. And as soon as they got into the airspace, all the systems went wrong. The navigation systems were interfered with because the Russians had found out the route and then jammed their systems. So it's a disease. And the more I speak with John Prideaux and you listen in, and if there are any viewers who do that, it's getting more worrying, not less. Like what was on the Financial Times this morning. You know, bots that can reason. Bots that can reason. Where are we going here?
Yeah.
To me, it's plain as a pikestaff where we're going. The human race, the Homo sapien, may well become redundant. You know, Blade Runner may come to pass with replicants, if not robots. It won't be in your lifetime and it won't be in mine.
No, but we're sowing the seeds.
But it will be in somebody's lifetime, as indeed will be the dangers of climate change. Harry amuses me on many levels, but he just won't accept climate change in the sense that it's affected by man. As far as he's concerned, this is all just cyclical meteorological world conditions. I beg to differ.
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
Well, I stand between the two of you. I just simply do not know. There is evidence for both.
Well, there's plenty of evidence out there, Keith. I'm not trying to bang a drum, but there's plenty of evidence out there.
Yeah, of lots of things, but does it have the effect that is claimed? Totally.
Probably not totally, but how can it be denied that with a huge country like China alone, the States aren't too good, Russia certainly isn't, but let's take China. As Harry himself said, they're building a coal-fired power station every week.
Yeah.
Now, imagine what's being puthered into the air in China and the world ecosystem. We already know that Beijing is a highly polluted place. They get smogs. Why did London get smogs? Because of coal. How did the smog end? Because we went coalless, we went smokeless.
Yeah, but I think also is while I accept this may be exacerbated by man-made forces, it also wasn't man-made that froze the Thames at the beginning of the last century.
I agree with you entirely. I agree with Harry that the base camp is cyclical world weather. That I get. But I will not accept that man has not altered things.
No, I agree with you. I am sort of hybrid. I stand with the foot in both camps. Yeah.
Yes. Well, luckily you haven't got a foot on each iceberg, because otherwise you'd be doing the splits.
Well, there is no question that the poles are badly affected. How much is like Icarus? We're flying too close to the sun, and how much is because we've been pouring toxins into the atmosphere? That's my question. I mean, I ask the question, Philip, because I simply do not know. I am not an expert. I have to listen to people and make up my own mind about the evidence that's presented, as indeed I'm sure that you do, being a barrister. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I am not an expert either, probably less than you. You know, you've travelled the world. You've worked all over the world.
Yes.
You have that life experience. I have not had that. But personally, I find some of these papers, submissions on global warming quite persuasive, on the premise that, okay, we haven't caused it, but we're certainly accelerating it. That's my worry, that we are accelerating it.
Yes, and we probably are. We get back to my area of expertise, which is communication. And what bothers me is that a lot of authorities, if you like, and sources of information don't explain themselves terribly well. That they are geared to getting the facts. One accepts their expertise and the concentration on these things, but they don't really tell us. You get some lovely girl appear on a television program, a BBC television program, explaining things, which is very intriguing. But she doesn't really have the authority to say this is exactly the case.
No, quite so. Now, you're probably aware that Stuart is behind you.
Yes.
I've done 1 hour and 40 odd minutes. I would like a break. I'd like to leave you to it now, if I may. Is Stuart coming on?
Yes. That's fine. And hopefully after Stuart, I'll have Mark maybe. Now, I don't know whether you were going away because you said that you got a driving duty.
No. That's on Thursday. No, we're going out for an early lunch with friends in a taxi in not that long.
Right.
So,
okay. So do you want me to take over until the end of the show?
Yes, please.
Okay. Do you want to then log out and I'll log back in with Stuart?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
I hope I've been of some help.
Okay. So I'll send you a link.
No. The next one is for when?
Now.
No, I can't do any more, Keith.
Oh, right. Okay. As long as I understand. You're going to log out, I log in, and then I say to the end of the show.
Yeah, it's yours for the rest of the morning.
Okay. All right. Understood.
And it will be similar once I've logged off with Harry on Wednesday.
Yes, sure. Okay. Yes,
So
we'll get the system right eventually. Yeah.
I hope I've been of some help.
Oh, no, don't. This has been a good show. A good show. In fact, we've gone over some feisty topics, if you like. We're not altogether agreement, which is great.
Well, do pass on my freedom of information request idea to Stuart.
Oh, yes, I will.
Okay. Bye-bye, Keith.
Bye, Philip. Okay, we'll end this session then. We'll be back in about 5 minutes with one Stuart Dolby.
Hello.